I know that many are still stuck on the freeway. I'm Hattie Hanley, Director of the California RightCare Initiative, which is a collaborative across the state where we run regional collaboratives. Our first was set up in San Diego. That one is independent now and running on federal funds. Our next community we brought up is in Sacramento, the capital region. This was our third community that we started, and we're starting a fourth community in Silicon Valley in November. So I'm really glad that this third Thursday timing works for everyone to gather here at RAND. And I just want to flag for everyone that we're moving our time to start the program at noon and have our networking lunch 11:30 to 12. So we're getting started a little bit late here today, but it's for good reason, which is that we needed to have a little discussion among our three Carols who are finally together here, our co-chairs. Would you please stand? Karol Watson, Carol Peden, and Carol Zaher. And thank you so much to RAND for hosting us, and Chloe Bird and Margaret Maglione, would you please stand so people know who you are? Part of what we do in the RightCare Initiative is really try to build community, and that's why we meet once a month and break bread together and talk about really big aspirational goals together. We have amazing leaders here in this room, and I will ask one of them, Carol Peden, who is the director of the Center for Innovation at USC School of Medicine and the former director of quality improvement for the English National Health Service in Southern England. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Hattie. Welcome everybody. It's a great venue and it's great to see so many people here in August. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Karol Watson with a K, she points out, who, very eminent cardiologist. I heard her speak last year. It was a fantastic meeting. As you can see from your bio, Karol Watson recently named Cardiologist of the Year by the American College of Cardiology California chapter. She's an attending and professor of medicine and cardiology at UCLA and director of the UCLA Women's Cardiovascular Health Center and the UCLA Barbra Streisand Women's Heart Health Program, co-director of the UCLA Program in Preventive Cardiology and director of the UCLA Fellowship Program in Cardiovascular Disease. She's also a principal investigator for several large NIH grants, including the Diabetes Prevention Program, Outcome Study, and the Multi-Ethnic Study of Atherosclerosis. So the rest you can read, there's a lot more, but I'm sure you'll give a very large welcome to Dr. Karol Watson.
Thank you so much, Carol, for that introduction. And it's a pleasure I can't tell you the last time I had an organization with three Carols on it. Never happened before, but I'm grateful for it. So I'm really thanking for the invitation, Chloe, to talk about preventing diabetes, because that's what I do. I prevent stuff. In the Preventive Cardiology program, we've done actually a pretty good job of preventing cardiovascular diseases via risk factor modification. The one thing that we really still find problematic is this explosion of diabetes that's happening. These are my disclosures. And this is this explosion in diabetes I'm talking about. If you look around the world, there's just been an enormous increase in diabetes all over the world. The biggest increase, it looks like, is in Africa, where there's been a 110% increase over the 2003 projected out to 2025. We have a great increase in this country as well, as you know, in diabetes and obesity and overweight are increasing exponentially. But what we need to do is rein this horse back in, because if it keeps galloping at this rate, we'll never catch up. is what we know. Diabetes, really common in this country. About 30 million Americans at least have diabetes. But what we never think about is what's underneath that, and that's prediabetes. So while we know there's about 35 million Americans with diabetes, we honestly don't think that much about the 84 million that have pre-diabetes. And that's 1 in 3 adults. So most people have no idea they have it. But what struck me, I was on the CCU service as an attending about a month ago. Virtually everyone in there had diabetes, pre-diabetes, or looked like they were going to get diabetes. So that is going to fuel our upcoming cardiovascular disease epidemic. So we really have to start paying attention to this entity. So what is prediabetes? Well, we think it's a reversible cardiometabolic risk factor where, you know, it's not diabetes, it's not normal, it's sort of right in the middle. So people who don't have stone cold normal glucose levels, and they don't have the diagnosis of diabetes, but we're pretty darn sure that if we do nothing, they'll develop it. What a lot of people don't realize, though, is that even if you don't have that diagnosis of diabetes, in prediabetes, you still have a 3 to 5-fold higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and that gives you an attendant higher risk of cardiovascular disease, morbidity, and mortality. So I think the pre-diabetes is like, oh, I got, you know, I'm okay, I'm almost at diabetes, but I'm not there, so I'm good. I think we have to make sure people understand that there's nothing good about pre-diabetes. And this is exactly what it looks like. So if you're normal, stone cold normal, then you have an A1C of about 5.3. It's just really normal. If you have a fasting plasma glucose of 99 or lower, that's pretty normal, although it probably is around 85, that's stone cold normal. If you have a oral glucose challenge test, oral glucose tolerance test, with the glucose not going higher than 139, that's considered normal. We know the diagnosis of diabetes, 6.5 or above A1C, 126 or above fasting glucose, and 200 or above OGTT. Well, prediabetes is right in the middle there. So if you look at that, I mean, I can't tell you how many patients would fall into that. If you look at the, especially the A1C, 5.7 to 6.4, that's really common. An A1C of 5.8 I consider as kind of like my average patient walking in the door. So most of them already have prediabetes. And what we know is that it's not an on or off switch. So everybody's so scared of diabetes, but not nearly as scared of prediabetes. We know that once you get to diabetes, you're at higher risk. Everyone knows that. But what we forget is that all those years, you have a steady march up in your fasting glucose, a steady march up in your post-meal glucose, your OGTT, and nothing just switches off the day they develop diabetes. All of that risk and cardiovascular risk factor burden, the insulin resistance, and the attendant pathophysiologic bad changes are going on in that whole prediabetes period. So we have to pay a lot more attention to this prediabetes. It's kind of like everyone wants to think about that patient that comes in with a blood pressure of 190 and they get so scared and they jump into action, but everybody forgets about the whole enormous number of people with a blood pressure of 150. It's just a little elevated, but because there are so many of them, those are the people who have more of the cardiovascular events. It's kind of like prediabetes. It's not as maybe severe of a risk for developing heart disease, but because there are so many, it's going to drive our epidemic. So that's why, you know, a lot of people, because you have this slow, steady march, a long time of insulin resistance, glucose intolerance before you actually get the definition of diabetes. Well, what can we do in that long period to try to prevent developing diabetes? Is there a way we can screen people to know who's at risk? And is there an intervention we can do to modify the risk for developing diabetes? And that's why the NIH got involved. So the Diabetes Prevention Program, which is one of my research studies, is a NIH, NIDDK, National Institute of Diabetes and Kidney Disease study. So they basically, this is their flagship study, the idea that we can start to prevent diabetes and hopefully prevent the resultant cardiovascular disease. So the first goal in this study was to prevent or delay the development of type 2 diabetes in persons with impaired glucose tolerance. Sounds pretty straightforward and simple. So it's a big study. There's a lot of sites all around the country, and we are here in Los Angeles. So we're site number 16. And all throughout the country, we're doing the same program, the same interventions, and showing the feasibility of doing it in multiple different places, in multiple different settings. So we have very rural area settings in Indian reservations. We have very high-end settings in Manhattan. We have, it's a very, very heterogeneous group. Who got into the DPP study? Anyone who's over the age of 25, they had to have both elevated fasting and postprandial glucose. So we remember, when you have abnormal glucose tolerance, it could either be that just when you wake up in the morning, it's already high because your body made too much glucose overnight, or it could be that you don't make too much overnight, you're fine until you challenge someone with a glucose load. So we wanted to make sure people had both. And that makes a more high-risk population. Because most people actually will start with one or the other. Either your fasting's high, but your postprandial is fine, or the other way around. But we wanted to make sure people had both. They had to have an elevated body mass index, but we wanted to overrepresent some of the ethnic and high-risk populations. So any ethnicity could get in, but especially in Los Angeles, we have over-enrolled Hispanics and other centers of over-enrolled Native Americans or South Asians. So we wanted to get a really ethnically diverse population. So we got a lot of eligible participants, and believe it or not, it's not that hard to find a bunch of people with prediabetes or obesity. So we got a bunch of them. They're randomized to actually 4 different groups. The placebo group, a group that was with metformin, which is the standard first drug of treatment for everyone with diabetes. The second group of drugs was troglydzone. So this is actually, before I actually got involved in the study, but it was a TZD, thiazolidine, that was a drug to treat diabetes. Troglydzone was subsequently taken off the market. So the troglydzone group had to be disbanded and converted to placebo. And then there was an intensive lifestyle group. So after troglydzone went away, there were 3 groups left: intensive lifestyle, metformin, and placebo. The metformin dose that was chosen was at 850 milligrams per day, escalating after 4 weeks to 850 milligrams twice daily. So that was the metformin. The placebo group had exactly matching pills to metformin, and they got dose advanced just like they were on drug. Everybody was blinded to their fasting and postprandial glucose measures, their OGT measures. So when they got their OGTT or their fasting glucose checked, some people just happened to get up titrated on their placebo just so nobody knew who was on what. And this was the lifestyle intervention. It was really pretty intensive. So it sounds simple. So we asked people to lose 7% of their body weight. So for a 150-pound woman, that's about 10 pounds. We asked them to do that by watching portion sizes and calories, to decrease their total fat to about 25% or less of total calories, and to decrease their calories to about 1,200, 1,800 calories per day. Then we asked them to get active, and our goal was at least 150 minutes of physical activity a week. And we said, we want you to do whatever you know you can sustain. So most people chose walking. And we asked them to walk at a brisk pace, not a stroll, but a get moving walk. And 150 minutes a week. That's 30 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, or 75 minutes on the weekend each day. So it's not a lot. This is just something that seems really easy to bite off. But you'd be shocked at how intensive you have to engage with the participants to keep them on this track. So what happened? Well, this is what happened with lifestyle. The placebo group in black, metformin in blue, lifestyle in green. So the lifestyle participants increased their physical activity greatly, and they kept it up for the full 4 years of the study. And that was very good. Everyone got an attention group. They got equal attention. So they had important classroom lessons about taking care of themselves, getting enough sleep, and all those other things, but not specifically about increasing their physical activity, whereas in the lifestyle group, that was a big component of all their education. This is what happened to the weight. The lifestyle patients lost the most weight, and you can see this is what happens to everybody who tries to lose weight. In that first 6 months, everybody lost a little bit of weight except the placebo group, but then it started to drift slowly upwards. But even at the end, the lifestyle participants had lost significantly more weight than either metformin or placebo. I'll talk more about the weight loss because that was really important to the overall outcomes. And along with that, increased physical activity and decreased weight, and this is what happened to the patients with diabetes. The lowest rate of conversion to diabetes was in the lifestyle group, the green line. Intermediate conversion was in the metformin group. That is the blue line. And the highest rates of conversion to diabetes was in the placebo group, the group that really just got sugar pills. That's the black line. What's interesting about this is the metformin group, they're on a diabetes drug. So they are developing diabetes while on a diabetes drug. The placebo group were not on a diabetes drug and yet still have a lower rate of conversion. Oh, I should say. So the relative risk reduction for the metformin group was about a 31% lower rate of conversion to diabetes, whereas it was 58% in the lifestyle group. And it really didn't matter whether you were male or female, so everyone had reduction in conversion to diabetes with lifestyle, both men and women. Didn't matter what age you were, and I'll talk more about this later, but look at the over 60-year-old group. They had the best, most robust response to lifestyle. And it didn't matter what race, ethnicity you were, everyone had benefit. And it didn't matter what your BMI was. Even people who started off with the lowest BMI, you know, the 24 to less than 30, they actually had the best response to lifestyle. If you look at the highest BMI, the greater than 35, there was no difference between metformin and lifestyle group, but everybody was better than placebo. And in the 30 to 35, you had that same stepwise increase in the progression to diabetes. And this was published in the New England Journal, got a lot of attention because for once we could show that we could prevent progression to diabetes amongst patients with prediabetes. And that was the very first lesson learned from the diabetes prevention program. In this study, lifestyle trumped medication for preventing diabetes. Now, I mentioned this in intervention, and I sort of just told you how, you know, it was pretty straightforward. It was very straightforward intervention, but it really took a lot of attention to get it implemented. So we wanted them to lose 7% of their body weight. We wanted them to decrease total fat to less than 25% of calories, keep their calories between 1,200 and 1,800 a day, and to move at least 150 minutes per week. In order to get that done, we had a lot of contact with our participants. So over the 24 weeks of their initial intervention, they had 16 core curriculum lessons. So that's a lesson about every week and a half. So they were coming in, we were talking to them, we were giving them all their education about how we're going to do this, how we're going to support them, and everything. And the placebo group got an equal amount of attention, but not focused on the lifestyle intervention. Then there was a long-term maintenance program. We called it a boost or a lifestyle program where the participants would then come back in about every 3 to 4 months for a group activity, either a video or a lecture or just something to keep them engaged with the program. Everyone got a case manager. Everyone had access to this really rich support staff, a dietitian, a behavioral counselor, an exercise specialist, so a lot of touches in our population. And so some of the things, again, like you tell people, like, I just want you to start exercising, most people are like, I have no idea what they want you to do. So we actually had them really talk about, okay, what do you think you're gonna do? Really talk about specific exercises that we'll do, behavioral modification skills. What if you don't have time or childcare, like solutions to counteract whatever excuse they were gonna give. We really focused on self-monitoring techniques. We asked them to weigh themselves every single day. And there's some data now that some people agree, some don't, but we'll talk about that. Ways to problem solve, ways to individualize their programs. We did a lot on like their social cognitive, so how they felt about themselves and how many of our participants, you'd be shocked, they can't even imagine themselves losing weight. Tried, it always fails, so you have to sort of break down those barriers. And again, frequent touches were essential. So after the DPP study ended, great results, we were like, we gotta keep this going. So the NIDDK then funded us to go onto the DPP outcome study phase. So we've now shown we can prevent diabetes. We want to show that that leads to a reduction in cardiovascular disease. So there was this whole period where they're done with DPP, they haven't started DPP OS yet, so what can we do to keep them engaged? So we had a whole DPP post-core program and then a bridge program. This is after that, and the post-core program started with that intensive 24 weeks where we saw them every week and a half. But still, we said, you know, we still are gonna have monthly visits, self-monitoring. So we had monthly visits where they saw us, and then we had, like every 3 months, we had programs where we actually brought them in for education. Supervised exercise, offering those periodic classes about every 3 to 4 months. And then we had we were given this toolbox, which was just a pot of cash that we could do kind of whatever we wanted with to help people stay engaged. So one of the things we did is we had a party with some videos, like movies, that kind of got people involved, because the social component of this was big. Everybody got pedometers, we got them health club memberships, cooking classes. We actually we paid for some people's nannies so that they could come into the clinic. So that was a very nice part of the program. So what we really found and learned from this is that the lifestyle intervention, it can't just be lose weight and start exercising, which is what we always tell patients in their 17-minute clinic visit. It's like it's got to be so much more than that, because there's so many barriers to losing weight and exercising and all of the above. Okay, so one of the things, as I mentioned, weight loss turned out to be absolutely key to preventing diabetes, and no one's surprised by that. Well, I mean, no one's surprised by that now, but honestly, that was one of the kind of surprising findings from the DPP. People were like, oh, it's all about weight loss, huh? Okay. If you look at the weight loss categories, if they had a really low BMI to start with, even down to 22, up to 30, 29, they had a 65% reduction in the progression to type 2 diabetes in the lifestyle group. If they were in the middle BMI category, 61% reduction. And if they're in the highest BMI category, 51% reduction. As I mentioned, as your BMI got higher, metformin looked better compared to lifestyle, but lifestyle was still way better than placebo. Okay, so as I mentioned, DPP was, we started enrolling in 1996. It was finally published in 2002, and the goal was to prevent or delay development of type 2 diabetes in people with impaired glucose tolerance. Then, all participants were offered lifestyle sessions in what we call this BOOST program. The reason we did that is because we knew we wanted to do a second phase. I got involved when DPPOS started. We knew we wanted to do a second phase, and we knew we had to keep them engaged somehow. And we had just, given this great press release, it was all over the news about how amazing this lifestyle was. So we didn't want anyone to feel like, well, what about me? Like, we wanted everybody to have access to this great lifestyle program. So everybody in this boost period, we call it the bridge period, got lifestyle classes. Pretty much the same ones that the DPP originally got. Then from 2002 to 2013, we had the first phase of the DPP-OS study. And the goal of that study was to prevent diabetes complications such as kidney, eye, nerve problems, and cardiovascular disease. Okay, so what you'll see, if you look at the DPP over there on the left and DPP-OS over on the right, is we have that nice stepwise break between the placebo, metformin, and lifestyle and DPP. Then we have that bridge period where everyone got the same intervention pretty much. So what happened in DPP-OS? Everybody lowered their rate of diabetes. So the lifestyle rates stayed about the same, metformin rates came down, and the placebo rates came down, because we're now giving everybody that same intervention. So the original lifestyle participants continued to develop diabetes at about the same lower rate during DPP-OS as they did during DPP, but the placebo and the metformin groups now suddenly lowered their rates of diabetes development similar to the lifestyle group. And that makes sense, because now they got the same intervention that the others got. Well, what do we find out? So from the DPP and to DPP-OS, we saw that we could delay development of diabetes for about 10 years, and I'll show you that publication. So the difference in progression to diabetes was about 4 years for the lifestyle group, about 2 years additional time free of diabetes for the metformin group. And the lower rate of diabetes development means that the original lifestyle participants had a 34% lower risk of developing diabetes, and the original metformin participants 18% after 10 years. And so that was what we published in the Lancet. 52% of the placebo group developed diabetes. So now we're 10 years out. We're about 15 total years out. And those pre-diabetes people, 50% of them in the placebo group went on to get diabetes. Again, if you do nothing, that's what's going to happen to everyone. 47% of the metformin participants still developed diabetes, even though they're on metformin. And 42% of the lifestyle participants developed diabetes. So again, it's like one of those you could run but you can't hide things. So even though we did a good job of initially reducing the risk to diabetes, people still went on and developed diabetes. It also is cost effective. So when you prevent people from getting a very costly disease like diabetes, you save money. So over 10 years, the metformin treatment reduced the cost of medical care by about $1,700 a person, and the lifestyle group reduced the cost of medical care by about $2,600 per person. So this is what William Herman, who's a health sciences researcher at the University of Michigan, said. These data put diabetes prevention in the category of prenatal care for pediatric immunizations. It's dramatic when an intervention can improve the health of the population and potentially save money at the same time. It's a win-win. Okay, so that was the third lesson we had. Preventing diabetes is cost effective. I mean, it kind of makes sense, and that's what we expected, but it was nice to be able to show it. Now, what were the keys to the DPP lifestyle success? Like I said, it was weight loss. It's all about weight. For every 2.2 pounds of weight loss, the risk of developing or progressing to diabetes was reduced by 13%. And again, what were the keys to losing weight? Well, reducing total calories, especially fat calories, getting that 150 minutes of activity each week, that was the keys for these people maintaining their lower weight. Of those things, calories, weight, what you put in your mouth, diet was by far the most important part of them losing weight. Turns out that exercise turned out to be the most important part of them maintaining weight loss. So as I showed you the weight change over time for DPP, but this is now looking at DPP plus DPP-OS. And what you'll see is that the placebo group, the black line,